Welcome, everybody. For those of you whom I have not met yet, I am Steve Duffy, the head of school here at Falmouth Academy, and it is my privilege to welcome you here tonight. As we begin this evening, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this wonderful event could not have happened without the combined efforts of lots of people here on campus and out there in the larger world. Far too many to name right now. But there is one person who has been the inspiration, spearhead, the leader, the motivator of everyone involved in putting tonight's celebration together. She is always at the center of school events, and while she assembles a crack team to help make them happen, she is the common thread. So as we begin our celebration, could you please join me in offering a great big show of appreciation for all that she has done, not just tonight, but for all that she does to keep people connected to the school and to celebrate what is special about Falmouth Academy. Help me in thanking Barbara Campbell. We're gathered here this evening to celebrate the confluence of two significant milestones: the 40th anniversary of the founding of Falmouth Academy and the retirement of the last founding faculty member of the school, Lalise Melillo, after 52 years as an educator and mentor. I placed the air quotes around the word retirement because all of us who know Lalise know that she will never actually retire. That is, completely remove herself from the field. She is not built that way. I suspect, if anything, that Lalise will use the fact that she doesn't have a structured daily schedule at Falmouth Academy to involve herself in even more activities than she had previously, specifically because her schedule is now completely her own. So retirement is probably not the right word to describe what Lalise is doing here today. Perhaps we should speak of it as an evolution in her career, a metamorphosis, a paradigm shift. Or perhaps she's just clearing the decks so that she can populate them with new and exciting adventures. I don't know exactly. But it's important to try to get the words exactly right, because for 52 years, 40 of them at Falmouth Academy, that's exactly what Lalise has done. Taught her students, whether it be history, English, rhetoric, or any of the other myriad roles that she's undertaken, taught her students to get the words right, to be precise, both in the meaning and the delivery of what they think, write, and speak. In Shakespeare's eponymous play, Hamlet offers direction to the first player prior to his performance. He tells him to suit the action to the word to the action. This is what Lalise has done, tirelessly, with grace and gentility of a lady and the intensity and tenacity of an intellectual powerhouse. When we considered ways to honor Lalise's career, we consulted her about what might be appropriate and meaningful to her, but we hadn't yet told her what we decided. So I'm honored here tonight to announce the establishment of the Lalise Melillo and Founding Faculty Endowment for Faculty Support. Hear, hear. This endowment will generate funding for, among other things, professional development for teachers at Falmouth Academy so that our teachers, all our teachers, will have additional support in doing what Lalise and all of our founding faculty have modeled so well for their entire careers, being lifelong learners who bring enthusiasm for new ideas and new skills to the classroom daily. I am particularly pleased to announce that some enthusiastic fans of Lalise have already contributed over $30,000 toward the $50,000 that's needed to establish an endowed fund. For those of us here tonight who would like to join those ranks, there are forms on the name tag table in the back, or you can contact the development office. Got to get that plug in. There are several people here tonight who will be offering their thoughts and reflections upon the influence that Lalise has had on them and on the school during these 40 years. Longevity is one of our themes tonight. Lalise's time here has coincided with the life of the school. She was here at its founding, and with the exception of a couple of years where she took leaves of absence, the 2017-18 school year will be the first since 1977 that Lalise has not formally been a member of the faculty. So we thought we'd invite the man who led the school for the majority of its existence thus far. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in his essay Self-Reliance that an institution is the lengthened shadow of one man. Falmouth Academy, for most of its 40 years, has been one such institution. And the man in whose lengthened shadow everyone at FA toils is Bruce Buxton. At 23 years, he's the longest-serving headmaster the school has ever and may ever have. Please welcome Bruce Buxton.
Well, I can't begin to express how thrilled I am to be here, even though I'm not very happy that Lalise is stepping away from a school that she has made a huge contribution to. I will point out to you that on the back of your programs, you have what I think of as the sacred text, a letter by William Johnson Corey, master of Eton College. He wrote it somewhere around 1860, I think. And his students called him Toot. The students at Eton were never very respectful of their teachers. They all had nicknames, but Toot wasn't a bad nickname because Toot was short for tutor. He was a teacher, and he was famous for his teaching. But he's actually now famous for something quite different. He's famous for his translations of Latin poetry. And that's Steve mentioned my shadow. I hate to think of the school as even casting much of a shadow. Reminds me of Dracula. But I am going to mention shadows because Corey does. But his text, this famous letter he wrote, is on the back of your program. And to make my speech less dull, I'm hoping that you can follow along with that at moments when I refer to Corey's letter. Because I think it has relevance to Lalise's speaking and to Lalise's teaching and to the school's history. My formal introduction of this is headmaster, trustees, friends, and fellow alumni. And I say fellow alumni because any of us who've enjoyed the privilege of being part of the Falmouth Academy community, in collaboration with Lalise, are her alumni. We've learned from her energy and enthusiasm for what mattered. How could this young school be a hero? 40 years ago, Lalise knew. But now, I'm going to offer you my patented contribution to pretentious educational jargon. Comes from happy childhood memories of mine. Snap, crackle, and pop. Snap, crackle, and pop's a rare quality I have looked for at any school I have visited, and I use that term whenever I find evidence that students are using what they have discussed in their classrooms outside of their classrooms, students who are enjoying the play and power of their minds. I'll offer you 3 examples of snap, crackle, and pop at Falmouth Academy, all 3 cases sprung from the head of Lalise's fine teaching. The first occurred at a dance which I was chaperoning. I was standing just outside the doors of our old gym and performance space, now transformed into the wonderful Simon Center, when the double door suddenly burst open, followed by the blat of teen dance music and by 2 ninth-grade boys in loud argument. One boy shouted to the other, "The Delian League was too at fault." Anyone familiar with the traditions of Falmouth Academy will date this incident. It coincided with the excitement of the Athens-Sparta debate in which the 9th grade history classes were taught by Lalise Melillo. Snap. On another occasion, the director of a national foundation was visiting the school as part of my effort to get funding for our endowment. I was offering him a tour of the school, which was humming with its usual intensity. I decided to take my guests down to our new gym to show off the banners our students had won in their various competitions. As we began to descend the back stairs, several seniors darted out from under the stairwell. I was, unjustly as it turned out, apprehensive. What are a bunch of seniors doing skulking under the stairs during classes? Or any time, for that matter? Why, rehearsing Hamlet's famous soliloquy for presentation to Mrs. Malone's class, of course. And to my delight, eager to show off to the unexpected arrival of an audience how good they were. Crackle. As my guest and I wandered off to the gym, I thought to myself, if we don't get the grant I've applied for, we'll never get a foundation grant. Yes, we got the grant. And in connection with Lalise's careful teaching of Hamlet, I remember a moment in our all-school meeting when teachers and students donned outrageous holiday apparel for a contest called the Christmas Goof, something like an ugly sweater contest. Lalise's colleague, the polymath, Olive Van Hobby, looked like a winner and got a huge round of applause for her festive garb. Suddenly, Lalise, in the middle of school meeting, asked the students, who can think of a line from Hamlet that describes this situation? Senior Teresa Wessling's hand shot up. Oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown. Act 3, Scene 1. Pop. You build a school on the shoulders of its teachers. In the celebration of the school's 40th anniversary, it seems appropriate to refer to the plaque we placed at the foot of the stairs here in the entranceway to celebrate the building of our campus in Falmouth in 1989. We quoted Isaac Newton, who in 1676, writing to the scientist Robert Hooke, quoted 12th century sage Bernard of Chartres. Newton wrote, "If I have seen farther, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." In our case, the little giant school, a small school that from the first punched well above its weight, stood on the shoulders of its remarkable founding faculty, all friends of Lalise's. We celebrated then a school built on those shoulders, and Lalise was a leader among those leaders who offered critical wisdom at a critical time in the school's history. I think of her as a caryatid of sorts, a pillar in the form of a goddess you may find supporting porches on the better class of Greek temples. Lalise suggested a number of things I've used in work with other schools. She suggested in conversation with me one day that one way of thinking about a school's culture, something very hard to define without getting lost in fuzzy abstractions, would be to inventory the these, what everyone in the school community would recognize as a shared event, like the science fair, the all-school meeting, the Athens-Sparta debate. An inventory of the these would reveal the implicit drivers and values of the school, the bedrock of the school culture. Educators are drowning in claptrap, standards, find your passion, best practices, skill sets, robust research, and education for the 21st century. But we have not always talked about education in such shallow and silly ways. In the middle of the 19th century, the master of Eton, William Johnson Corey, in a famous letter shows plainly what good classroom teachers know by experience, how to talk and think about schooling and teaching. His famous statement is never found in the meetings of professional associations or in the curricula of education schools, but keeps a life of its own beneath the orthodox radar of bureaucratic educationese. I first discovered his why you go to a great school because a generous retired headmaster passed it on to me when I came to Falmouth Academy because he thought I'd enjoy it. He was right, and I began to track where it appeared in my reading. It jumped up in Harvard Dean Rakowski's book on the modern university, and later in the British philosopher Michael Oakeshott's Meditations on Education, and most recently for me, in the newly published second edition of the Littleton Hart Davis letters, It pops up and is kept alive not in education textbooks, but in the ruminations of thoughtful people. Its language is the language thoughtful teachers use when they talk and think about what they do. That's why it's free of jargon. The master of Eton tells us what to expect from a great school. At a school, you are not engaged so much as acquiring knowledge, and this is surely the utilitarian fallacy of data, so we can make data-driven decisions. You are not engaged in so much in acquiring knowledge as in making mental efforts under criticism. Remember those mental efforts under criticism? Not the happiest moments for us all. But this touches on the essential courage necessary to teach and to learn. A certain amount of knowledge you can indeed with average faculties, acquire so as to retain, nor need you regret the hours that you have spent on much that is forgotten, for the shadow of lost knowledge at least protects you from many illusions. And that's my favorite section of this letter, the shadow of lost knowledge. That shadow, irrelevant on its surfaces, informs our capacity for judgment. It forms our character. But you go to a great school not for knowledge so much as for arts and habits, and here is why we see Lalise teaching the way she does. For the habit of attention, for the art of expression, for the art of assuming at a moment's notice a new intellectual posture, for the art of entering quickly into another person's thoughts, for the habit of submitting to censure and refutation, for the art of indicating assent or dissent in graduated terms, for the habit of regarding minute points of accuracy, for the habit of working out what is possible at a given time, for taste, for discrimination, for mental courage and mental soberness. Above all, you go to a great school for self-knowledge. Well, you hear the echoes of Aristotle and also of Immanuel Kant, whose famous slogan for himself was, Aude sapiens, dare to know, dare to think. It does require courage, and Lalise knew that, always as a teacher, and I think she promoted that in her classes. Lalise was a leader in the teaching of such arts and habits here at Falmouth Academy. She served as a champion of the kind of teaching necessary at the center of the great school. Corey would have admired her classes, her aims, and her methods. Martha Nussbaum is a philosopher in residence at the University of Chicago. Her concept of narrative imagination helps to illustrate Corey's ideas. In her book, Cultivating Humanity, a classical defense of reform in liberal education, Nussbaum argues that when students possess a narrative imagination, they demonstrate the ability to think what it might be like to be in the shoes of a person different from oneself, to be an intelligent reader of that person's story, and to understand the emotions and wishes and desires that someone so placed might have. We're back to Corey's arts and habits, and back to Lalise's rhetoric and persuasion, and forward for an education in the 20th century, for the 21st century. My hope for Lalise is that in her retirement, she writes up some of her insights about teaching in schools. Hers is a voice unusual and insightful. Her experience here enriches those insights just as her insights have enriched the school. I want to be in line waiting to stand on her shoulders.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Tavares, class of 1994, and I am so honored to be here tonight to celebrate Mrs. Melillo. It has been a long time since I was a student. When I started 7th grade, FA was in rented space on Otis Air Force Base, but my life has been rooted in education ever since then. The fact that I became an educator, the fact that I simply could never imagine a more interesting and important and meaningful way to spend my time has everything to do with Falmouth Academy and with Mrs. Melillo. I'm speaking from my own experience tonight, but I know that there are so many people here in all kinds of professions who would also say that their time in her classroom was fundamental to what they do, to what they value, to who they are. I can still feel myself sitting in her classroom, excited to decorate a ziggurat cookie, carefully folding my homework papers in half the long way and writing my name on the outside. sharing in a class discussion about the Roman Empire as Mrs. Melillo drew this sprawling, intricate web on the board, thatched with arrows and bubbles. To me, that image still represents the beautiful complexity of historical understanding. I also remember when Mrs. Melillo took our senior English class to Food for Thought, where we talked about Hamlet over tea and muffins. I can feel the sense of play when we had learned to be so attentive to the nuances of voice and language that we could create precise and often hilarious drugstore rewrites. And I, in particular, remain so grateful for Mrs. Melillo's guidance in writing a personal essay about my two grandmothers that did much more than fulfill a college application requirement. It really was an experience of how writing can be a form of self-discovery and self-knowledge. I think a common thread in all these moments is Mrs. Melillo's authentic and infectious sense of urgency. She conveys this feeling that there could be nothing more important, nothing more interesting than what's happening right then in the classroom and in your own learning and thinking. After I started teaching, I read some of Alfred North Whitehead's writing on education, and I recognized something that I had experienced in Mrs. Melillo's classroom when he described these two key moments in learning, the moment of enthusiasm and the moment of precision. I've never met another educator who is as intentional and as skilled in nurturing both of those moments, the sense of curiosity, wonder, discovery, and at the same time, the rigor and focused attention to detail and skills that build real mastery. I think it's this combination, really this interdependence of joy and rigor that have made Mrs. Melillo's teaching so transformative. She is also that rare teacher, though probably not so rare at FA as in other schools, who remains an important presence long after graduation. Mrs. Melillo came to my Wellesley graduation along with my parents, which reveals something about the role she played in helping me become the first person in my family to go to college. Earlier that year, she had advised me on my Rhodes Scholarship application, and she wrote me a letter of recommendation. She's actually the person who encouraged me to reach for that in the first place, so I think I have my time at Oxford to thank her for as well. Later on, she gave me invaluable advice about approaching my first teaching job. She was part of my wedding ceremony, and she and Jerry even hosted a jazz brunch at their house the next day. Somewhere in those years, she shifted from being Mrs. Melillo to Lalise, and from a teacher to a valued friend. I know I will always be trying to live up to her example of a life of purpose, deep thinking, hard work, graciousness, and delight. Lalise, when I think of your influence on my life and multiply that by all of the students that you taught in 40 years here at FA and 52 years as a teacher, I just feel profound gratitude and admiration. Thank you for your gifts to me and to this community.
I am Mike Deasy. I am a teacher and coach here at Falmouth Academy. I'm also an alumni, but I'm most likely been invited to speak up here because next year I will be taking over Lalise's rhetoric class. Yes. And once I realized Lalise's proposal that I take over rhetoric was going to become a reality, which I doubted for a long time, I knew at least one thing I needed to do to prepare myself for this professional leap. I needed to develop a repertoire of Melillian gesticulations and reactions. I spent countless hours in front of the mirror at home practicing. I started small, developing my thumb turn, which I learned requires that one mutter words like crafting, molding, and shaping. I then spent a few weeks working on my gasp, and as March break arrived and the end of this year approached, I was confident. I had put in the hours, and I felt ready. So when I found myself at the rehearsal for the Honor Society induction, listening to a student speaker whose pacing just didn't feel quite right, I saw my opportunity to test out some of my new tools in my teaching toolkit. After the rehearsal, I went up with this young speaker to practice at the podium in room 209, and as we entered the Lalise Melillo classroom, this young man looked around in awe. He stopped, sincerely amazed, and said, "I've never been in this room before." This is surprising because most of the rooms at Falmouth Academy look pretty much entirely the same. And as I watched him quietly manage the sense of lifting, the unmistakable sense of rising to be the best version of yourself that one feels when entering Mrs. Melillo's room, I forgot all about the new additions to my toolkit. We worked together for about 20 minutes, finding some points of emphasis, working on pacing, and then moved on to our weekend. 20 minutes. Any student of Mrs. Melillo knows that you cannot possibly do justice to a speech in 20 minutes. And as I left the building, my sense of readiness deflated. And as we all know, the readiness is all. So I returned the next day, this time to practice my own speech. And as I crossed the threshold from the hallway into room 209, I once again felt that sense of lifting. And I stopped to wonder, what is that? How, after all this time, after being not only Mrs. Melillo's student, but Lalise's colleague and friend, do I still feel the need to read more carefully, to speak more clearly when I enter this room? And as I began reading my speech aloud once again, I thought back over the process of writing it. I had, of course, sought Mrs. Melillo's help. And over a week, hopefully not for the last time, we dove together into that savory process of composition that we both enjoy so much. Together, we relished words. We molded phrases. We crafted parallel structure. We even grappled at moments over what we each thought the speech wanted to be. It was the full experience. And at the end of it, I held in my hand something that felt true. It felt like me. And I realized that the sense of gravity, of importance, of a responsibility to lift yourself up, which lives in the energy of room 209, comes from Lalise's dedication to helping students search for and understand themselves. This dedication, which rests in this collaborative composing process, a process that empowers each of her students individually, has blossomed into a collective understanding in the school that this is the most important work a person, not a student, can undertake. Language gives us the power to create ourselves. Is it fun and valuable to try on the voice of another, as in the drugstore rewrite, one of Mrs. Melillo's trademark assignments? Of course, yes, I love the drugstore rewrite. I think we all do. But the message of Mrs. Melillo's rhetoric class is that authentic and clear communication requires attentiveness. We write to know our own stories and to share them with others. And we hope to learn those stories too. When we pay careful attention to these memories, they become the threads that, woven together, form the fabric of a community. And isn't this a beautiful one? This is ultimately why we gather here today. 40 years of creating attentively and sharing sincerely. Without this deep sense of the value of narration, we could have a school building and students and teachers, but we could not have the depth of identity that draws alumni back, that makes our seniors so proud, that inspires our students to approach their studies seriously and joyfully. The day before, when I had walked into room 209 with my first ever rhetoric student, I had not forgotten my Melillian repertoire, but rather something deep down inside of me, perhaps the ethos of Lalise, wouldn't let me teach in her voice, because it would not have been true. It would not have been me. And it would have allowed me to avoid the challenge that she equips all of her students so wonderfully to undertake, to absorb everything she gives us, and simultaneously to muster the confidence to find our own voice and come to know ourselves. And suddenly, there I am, sitting by myself in room 209 on a Saturday, pondering all of this, and I became awfully overwhelmed. So to distract myself, I moved to read my speech from behind the podium that lives in that room. And I saw the 3 note cards that Mrs. Melillo has taped inside of that podium. They read, breathe, slow, and in all capitals, actor. I felt reassured. As Lalise, the last founding mother, retires, we should feel slightly uneasy, knowing the beauty and depth of this school's spirit and the work that it will take to maintain it. But we can also feel confident, because we have the tools from Lalise's time here to guide us. We can honor her and all the founding faculty, not by trying to do as they did, as I had first thought, or by trying to make ourselves into them, as I had been trying to do. We must remember them by developing our own voices, by working to know our own stories, by sharing our stories with others, and by listening with that sense of deep attentiveness that all the founding mothers brought to this school. That kind of heartfelt devotion that inspires confidence and imagination in young people. I'd like to end by thanking Mrs. Melillo, my teacher, Lalise, my dear friend and guide, and all the founding faculty, many of whom are here today, for their dedication to their students, to their school, to each other, which the students often don't see, and for guiding us all to know ourselves and to write our own stories. Thank you all so very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bridget Miskell.
And I'm Sam Amazine, both Falmouth Academy alumni members and members of the great class of 2007.
When Barbara shared the news of Mrs. Melillo's impending retirement with the Falmouth Academy Alumni Council, we immediately began throwing out ideas for how we could honor her. Could we inscribe all her favorite books in the library? Could we stage a production of Hamlet with a cast of alumni? Neither idea seemed feasible, so I thought back to the final days of our senior year rhetoric and persuasion class. Sam was also my victorious Spartan teammate. Over the course of the school year, Mrs. Melillo worked tirelessly with each of us along the process of self-discovery, identifying our interests and strengths, and preparing us to share those learnings with each other. She believed in each of our individual abilities so deeply that you felt as though you were her only student. Our work together came to fruition as we executed our speech teaching lessons, where we each guided our classmates through a finely crafted lesson plan and watched each other become leaders. Mrs. Melillo's appreciation for each of us was soon shared by all. To celebrate each other's accomplishments and to carry that confidence with us beyond her classroom as we left for college, she asked us to write praise cards for our classmates. We set aside any high school angst and cliques to recognize each other's strengths and impact. I carried these note cards with me and would flip through them when I needed a reminder of what I was capable of, and of course, to feel as though Mrs. Melillo was cheering me on. With that idea in mind, this past fall, we launched the Dear Mrs. Melillo campaign to collect praise cards from alumni.
Mrs. Melillo, over 200 alumni from your classes have sent in their stories. Many of these classes share very similar sentiments. They remember the fear they felt as new students peering into the freshman classroom for Western civilization, seeing your impenetrable web diagrams on the Velcro wall, not yet knowing that by the time you guided us through, every connection just seemed intuitive. They remember fishing for brownie points and trying to make it look like we weren't deliberately fishing for the brownie points. And of course, we all remember how you brought out the best in each of us. We'd like to share a few of the messages from our fellow alumni. Mrs. Melillo, you represent for me the spirit of Falmouth Academy, a paragon of female leadership, creating a classroom and community that supports unabashed enthusiasm, eccentricity, a sense of fun, and love of learning, while holding all members of the community to the highest standards of respect, care, and effort.
Mrs. Melillo, you taught me how to condense a nebulous and ambiguous thing, such as language, down into an ordered and understood droplet that I could use. That process of creating order, clarity, and simplicity from ideas and from reality is a skill that I have used every day since your class.
Every day, you stepped out of Mrs. Melillo's classroom a little bit brighter, setting higher standards for yourself, amazed at how much you could accomplish. Thank you for teaching me to always expect more of myself and to always believe in the potential of others. I'm not sure I've ever learned anything more valuable. Ms. Melillo, on behalf of all FA alumni, we'd like to thank you for helping each of us find our best self and scholar. Although many of us still argue over the Athenians and the Spartans because of Western Civ, we can all appreciate your tremendous contribution to this school and to our education. We're grateful for the opportunity to celebrate your incredible career and send you into a joyous retirement with praise from all of us. Thank you.
I've made some choices in my life and I've had some luck. I chose the right husband. I chose the right profession. And I got the right son as a gift from God, I think. But I had some really, really wonderful luck. And the spring of 1977, when Olive Ann Hobby called me and said, "You really should think about teaching at this school," I said, "Well, I taught at public schools in Connecticut, loved it, and I've gone to see the chairman of the English department at the high school, and maybe in a year or two." And in the mid-sentence, she said, "No, this is going to be different. This is going to be special." And I went and met Worth Campbell. And I was lucky that Falmouth Academy was opening up in the fall of 1977 with Deborah Bradley and with Olive Ann Hobby, and I think Dana Miskell is here tonight, and he was on the faculty with us. And then the very next year that Janet Kearsley and Nancy Twitchell and Julie Taylor joined us. And we embarked on an adventure, the result of which we didn't know the particulars of, but which we were sure was going to be something very special. And I think it has become something extraordinary. And the 40 years of the school and its growth, its thriving, its creativity are a tribute to everyone in this room. I'd like to thank the administrators who have supported and encouraged me. I'd like to thank the faculty and staff who have inspired me and who have made this place what it is. I'd like to thank the parents who entrusted me and others with their sons and daughters whom we have loved so much. And then I particularly would like to thank my students, former students, just done students, many of whom are here, for being so warm, funny, generous, smart, loving, and just dear, dear people in my life, and you will continue to be dear, dear people in my life. Please stay in touch. Make sure I have your email. I think you all have mine, lalise@meganet.net, please. I want to hear from you, and you have just made my life so wonderful. And I have to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to the speakers who were just extraordinary. And thank you to Falmouth Academy and my good fortune that it happened to open up in the fall of 1977. And I said to Olive Ann Hobby, well, I'll teach there if you can schedule me around my son's nursery school. And guess who was in charge of the scheduling? Olive Ann Hobby. That was another piece of good fortune. So Ted just about grew up with the school, and Jerry has shared the journey with me for these 40 years in the most wonderful way. So thank you to everyone, and we're celebrating Falmouth Academy 40 years tonight. Been more than this should be about me. It's really about the school, and it's an extraordinary place that is thriving in the most wonderful way, and all you have to do is look at Mike Deasy and listen to Mike Deasy to know that the future is in good hands. So, thank you very much, and room 209 will belong to him very, very soon, and it will become his. He will own it. And thank you to everyone for coming. It was lovely to have you here, and if you haven't yet had a hug, make sure you get one.
From the wonderful support of Olive Ann and Dr. Bradley as well. There was no bigger fan outside music department than Lalise. We share 209 with that door in between, and she has witnessed the growth of the choral program under my work here. And the kids have their back to that door, but so often Lalise just peeks her head in with this big smile. And just nodding and just seeing how it's going. And she has a particular love for the music she sang in the past, and a particular love for the classical music, for the great music. You know, when we did Lift Thine Eyes, she was just so excited, you know, and various pieces and like this. And since January, she's been humming a piece in my ear. She doesn't ask people favors. I think most of you know that. Like, would you do this for me? But she asked me a favor about doing something tonight. And And then about a month ago, she took away the request because she knew how busy we were and that we weren't going to be able to do it. And then she said, "Beside, I'll cry." She just has the hankies out. But anyway, we would like to warm up with a dazzling canon by George Philip Telemann, and then do the opening part of Bach's "Sheep May Safely Graze," her request.
Ich will den Herrn loben alle Zeit sein Lob soll immer da in meinem Munde sein, in meinem Munde sein. Sein Lob soll immer da in meinem Munde sein, in meinem Munde sein, in meinem Munde sein. Ich will den Herrn loben, ich will den Herrn loben.
They memorized the notes, not quite the words.
In closing tonight, I'd like to offer you some final words attributed to Confucius. If language is not correct, then what is said is not what is meant. If what is said is not what is meant, then what must be done remains undone. If this remains undone, morals and art will deteriorate. If justice goes astray, the people will stand about in helpless confusion. Hence, there must be no arbitrariness in what is said. This matters above everything. There have been many words spoken tonight, sincere, heartfelt, precise words. We've seen and heard examples of the fruits of a Falmouth Academy education. For 40 years, this school has labored earnestly to ensure that words and deeds are correct, deliberate, and acted upon. This does indeed matter above everything. Thank you all for coming out tonight and sharing with us this evening of celebration of Lalise and of the school. Our revels are now ended. I bid you all a gentle good evening and a safe journey home.